Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today I want to talk about the Missouri Tigers. Now, Eli Drinkwitz, head man there in Como, he was kind of rumored to be linked with that LSU job when it opened up before they zeroed in on Lane Kiffin. And that kind of gave a bit of a reality check to the coaching landscape, at least to me, in terms of, Drinkwitz is a decently coveted head coach. And that's for good reason. And that's because he's a good head coach, right? Missouri is Missouri. Right, so they haven't, been going to Atlanta. They haven't been making the playoff. They've been just sort of in that middle pack of the SEC. And because of some maybe persistent flaws with Missouri, like maybe not an elite defense or just not consistent scoring, bad quarterback take last year in the portal, Drink kind of gets slandered a little bit. But the fact that LSU was after him immediately gave me the confidence that, okay, yeah, Missouri really isn't that far away. Because looking at their roster this year, it really gets me excited, especially on offense. And when you kind of just block out all the outside hate, or maybe not hate, but just criticisms of Eli Drinkwitz, sure, he hasn't done it yet, but there's not a single coach in the country that's done it before they do it, if that makes sense, right? I mean, Ryan Day couldn't win a championship, then he did. Neither could Kirby Smart. Same deal, right? All these coaches can't do it until they do. So I'm not predicting a championship for Missouri this year by any means, but I do believe this is the year they can be very dangerous in the SEC, and that really starts off with their offense. So they portaled in Austin Simmons at quarterback. You remember last year they portaled in Bo Pribula coming from Penn State. He was really always more of his legs are a good threat. That's probably a bit of a stronger, higher graded aspect than his arm. Simmons is the opposite. He does have good, decent mobility, right? It's fine. His arm is eons. That's what Bo Pribula's was heading into last season. Right, so he's coming over from Ole Miss, is Simmons, and he didn't play last year in favor of Chambliss, not because he was benched, right? He was in the end, but Austin Simmons was hurt. But he was their week one starter. Austin Simmons was good enough for Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weis. When they were watching Trinidad in practice, they picked Austin Simmons on that team that they knew could accomplish what they did. Lane, Charlie Weis, that Ole Miss staff, they picked Austin Simmons to lead the team that they believe could win a national championship and could go to the playoff. Austin Simmons is legit, right? He was a four-star blue chip kid. He's been with the Rebels. He hasn't gotten a whole ton of rep yet, but I think that this is a situation, especially with the Missouri lineup this year, that he could really thrive. And why I think that this situation is so good for him is because of two massive factors, and that's the running game and the offensive line. I'm going to start off with the offensive line, actually, because the running backs are very well known. I'll get to them in a minute, though. But the O-line doesn't quite get enough shine. This is one of the most experienced, stupidly old offensive lines I can remember seeing it just about forever. Right? Every single projected starter on this offensive line is at least a senior. At least a senior is a very important part there. Because, look, Caden Green is really their, he's their kind of NFL prospect. He's sort of that guy that scouts are coming to watch on that offensive line. He's their youngest guy, and he's a true senior. Having your best player be your left tackle, who's also the youngest as a senior, is such crazy context for this offensive line. But going left to right there, right, at left guard, then you have Tristan Wilson, who is a redshirt senior. Dominic Giudice at center is a graduate. At right guard, Curtis Pigler, a redshirt senior. Then at right tackle, it was supposed to be Josh Atkins, who is coming over from Arizona State, but he had a bit of a setback in spring with over the summer, with an injury he got during the spring. But he's also a redshirt senior. He will be back at some point, but maybe not to begin the year. But behind them is Luke Work. But what's amazing about this offensive line is that they're not just old guys who are old for the sake of experience. They also have so many reps, right? Caden Green, 11 starts last year. Tristan Wilson played in all 13 games last year. Dominic Giudice, almost 900 snaps at center last year. Curtis Pigler, every single game as well. And Josh Atkins played almost 800 snaps for the Sun Devils. This is one of the most experienced and talented offensive lines in the country. So you get that as just a baseline to protect Simmons, give him pockets, give him time to throw, but you also open up this running game even more than they will do for themselves. We know about Ahmad Hardy. He would be my pick to win the Doak if we think he's going to play 12 games this year. Right? He was medically cleared. Drake was told us at SEC Media Days from the gunshot wound. But the timeline for being ready for football, that's a little bit up in the air. But I do believe he'll be back by the time we get to, really meaningful games for Missouri. But then behind him is Jamal Roberts, who would easily be running back one at 95% of other schools. Then behind those two guys, you have Zyshawn Edwards, who is coming up from Houston Christian as a redshirt sophomore. He had over 1,000 yards last year, 3 games over 100 yards. So yeah, so he's coming up, big time change in level of competition, level of difficulty, but he's proven he can be a firecracker. Right, and being a stick of dynamite can translate in certain spots, right? Because Missouri won't need him to be a workhorse back in a league he's not used to doing it in, but he can go explode for a play every other game when they needed the most. So I think Edwards is a massive add, and also Malay Finodi is a redshirt sophomore. He comes over from Montana, so Missouri went non-power, not even FBS ranks for their running backs, but to complement Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts, you don't need very much. So Austin Simmons at quarterback is in such a privileged position here on this team because of how good the running game is and how strong and experienced the offensive line is. He's going to have so much time. Defenses are going to be so worried about the ground game. And even when they're coming after him in a pass rush situation, it's going to be hard to get to him because of how good the O-line is. And the final touch on this offense is that receiver room. Now, I can't really point to a superstar, but I can point to a bunch of really, really good players. Donovan Olugbade is back for his true sophomore season. He had 30 grabs last fall as a true freshman. Caleb Goody is coming over from Cincinnati. He had almost 500 yards last year, over 16 yards per catch. They also bring over Caden Lee from Ole Miss. Now, he is familiar with Austin Simmons. They were teammates. They linked up a bunch while they were in Oxford. He had over 600 yards last year. And then Demarion Folks is a sophomore from a 4-star guy. Kenrick Lanier is a redshirt junior who comes over from Minnesota. And Sean Terry is a redshirt freshman. And then they also bring back Brett Norfleet at tight end, who is a 6'6", 260-pound senior who started 10 games last year and scored 5 times for the Tigers. So not only is Missouri's offense chock full of talent, but it's also just incredibly experienced. Right, I mean, you could kind of make the point that Austin Simmons hasn't started for an entire season, but he started plenty of games, and he is a redshirt junior. He's been in college for a long time. There's so much experience and so much talent on this Missouri offense, I believe it should be leaps and bounds better than where it was last year. And that's a good thing, because defensively, Missouri has a good bit of question marks. The turnover on Missouri's defense is unbelievable, right? But the biggest losses are Zion Young and Damon Wilson off the edge and Jeremiah Trotter at linebacker. So looking at those edge spots, Darius Smith needs to elevate his game. He'll be a redshirt senior this year, and he was obviously behind those other two guys in Zion and Damon Wilson last year. He was 6'5", 240 when I was doing my first roster picks in the spring. He's up to 260 now after media days. So putting on that weight, but not losing his bend, his athleticism is very promising to how locked in he is to being a stud off the edge. He also helped from a guy like Langdon Kitchen, who is 6'6", 264 as a senior. And then back at linebacker, right? I talked about replacing Jeremiah Trotter. Well, it's very hard to do that. But they went out and they got Robert Woodyard in the portal, who is a redshirt junior coming over from Auburn. He was first team all SEC last year. Like, for all intents and purposes, Drinkwitz and the Tigers went out and got a superstar at middle linebacker to replace Trotter. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Woodyard is going to be what Trotter was, or maybe even better, but he's very good. Right? I mean, when you lose a guy like Trotter, or just any really stud anywhere on the field, your biggest fear is, what is the floor for that position next year, right? You're losing your guy. Will that group bottom out? Will that spot bottom out? Robert Woodyard has an incredibly high floor, given what we've seen him do already in his college career, so I'm not worried about that being a weakness at all. Will he be what Trotter was? Maybe not. Will he be a weakness? Absolutely not. And even though there's a bunch of new pieces on this Missouri defense, if the offense is as good as I think it can be, or maybe not even just almost as good as I believe it can be, the defense only needs to be fine. Right, because if Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts are both healthy and they're a 1-2 punch, that opens up the passing game for Simmons with tons of protection in a dynamic, diverse group of receivers. I have no problem saying they can get to 28-31 every single game. So you look at your defense and you just say, you get 4 touchdowns. Help us out. Just let up 4 touchdowns, nothing more than that, and we'll go win this game for you. That obviously won't be true every single week, but that is it's very manageable for a defense that's just fine to hold teams to, limit teams to 27, 28 points, be in that high 20 range. So the Missouri Tigers, for all of the kind of afterthought attitude that tends to go towards Missouri, right, because they can't really win, they haven't really beaten any elite teams. Right, that is a fair knock on Drinkwitz and the Missouri Tigers, is that point to the win that he has at Missouri. You can't really grab like a big-time SEC win over an elite power. But that doesn't mean they can't go 9-3 this year. It doesn't mean they can't catch somebody on the right day and maybe go 10-2. And a 10-2 Missouri team will probably be in the playoff. But let's look at their hardest games on their schedule here real quick. Right, so I think they can start off 6-0. Arkansas Pine Bluff, at Kansas, Troy, at Mississippi State, Florida, and hosting Texas A&M. A&M I think is good. I don't know if they're going to be great. I think Missouri can be 6-0. But they better do that, by the way, because the back half of their schedule is very hard. After that A&M game, they're in Oxford at Ole Miss. Then you have your bye, you go play Arkansas on the road, maybe a tricky spot. Host Texas. Go to Georgia. Those are in back-to-back weeks. In an 8-day span, they're going to host Texas and then go to Athens. That's going to be a pretty hard stretch to even go 1-1 in. But then they close the year, home versus Kentucky, home versus Oklahoma. They need to just win all the games that they're going to be favored in. Because they'll be favored in their first 5. And if they're 5-0 at that point, they're probably favored against A&M at home. You'll be favored on the road at Arkansas, even though it's a tricky spot. And they will be favored at home against Kentucky and maybe against Oklahoma based on the season's going. They need to win their home games, maybe outside of the Texas game. Not falter in any game where they have the talent edge or they're even. And if they can grab a win in Athens, or maybe beat Texas at home with a home field advantage, then you're talking about a potential playoff berth for Missouri. But now, all this playoff talk I have for Missouri, that is the ceiling. That's not my expectation. My expectation is 8 or 9 wins. Look really good on offense at times, but maybe just not quite be there. Missouri's ceiling is a playoff berth this year because of the superstar power on their offense and just, putting your defense in a spot where they just have to be okay. So I am incredibly excited for what the Missouri Tigers can do this year, and if it all clicks early on and they get the ball rolling, look out for the Tigers.